Matt Merritt with Smokeware. Today we're going to be cooking Tommy Z's bulletproof brisket. The beauty of this brisket cook is how simple it is to cook a world-class tasting brisket. The most important part of cooking a brisket is to get a good piece of meat. And the way I usually do that is I order it through the butcher or through the grocery store, and I want to get it in the bag that it comes from actually the processing plant. The problem is when the grocery stores and other butchers get a hold of them, sometimes they'll open the bag and they'll trim off all the fat or a lot of it, and that's not what you want. This is actually a brisket flat. There's a flat and a point, and we're going to cook a flat. They're a little easier. They're not quite as marbled. The fat sits on top, and they cut a little better and serve better. And the first thing you want to do is simply open your bag and wash your brisket. Put it out on my plate. And usually I'll pat it dry. It doesn't have to be super dry. You just want to sort of pat off a bit of the excess moisture. Do both sides. This is really the secret to cooking this brisket, as explained to me by Tommy. He actually hosts a Saturday morning golf event at the TPC Sawgrass Valley course, a skins tournament. And he also serves a lot of great food before and after the tournament. He's an incredible host, and he's been doing it for years. But the one trick he showed me, which has paid big dividends, is the use of the spiced garlic. The chopped garlic, you can buy it at any grocery store. It's usually in the refrigerated vegetable section. I got the one with olive oil, but you don't have to. They pack it in water as well. But I use the olive oil. I think it gives me a little more seal around the brisket. The other thing he likes to do is to use McCormick's Montreal steak seasoning. I actually add in some of the smokehouse maple to add a little sweetness to the brisket. But to prepare the brisket is really simple. All we're going to do is just heavy coat it in the Montreal steak seasoning. You can't really put too much, so more is better. And then I'll put on a little bit of the maple to add a little bit of sweetness. And that's personal preference. You could really use any seasoning you want. This just happens to be one that works really well. So I'll do both sides. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this minced garlic and I'm just going to bathe the brisket in this minced garlic. And you would think you just kind of rub it all around the brisket, the edges. So obviously it has a very strong garlicky odor. And you would think it would make the brisket taste very garlicky, but it does not. Then I'm going to flip it over. So I'm going to use almost a whole jar or a whole complete jar of this minced garlic and olive oil in this brisket. I'm just going to bathe it up until it's completely covered on the sides, on the top, everywhere. Again, this is something you really can't overdo. So there you have it. I use the whole jar. And typically I do. Most of the time, this is about a little over a 4-pound brisket. Most of the time I'm cooking a 6 or 7-pound brisket. And I'll use the full jar there as well. I was going to spend a minute or so talking about a couple of setup options for cooking your brisket on the Big Green Egg. One is to use a traditional plate setter and drip pan. This is a great option. And if you're using large wood chunks, I'm going to be using hickory wood today. I'm going to be using smaller chips. But if you're using large wood chunks, you can just drop them right in your fire underneath your plate setter and drip pan. I'm using chips, so I'm going to use this smoke and flavor maker that has a chip basket that's suspended above the fire in conjunction with the drip pan, and obviously the grate will sit right up here. We'll also be adding some molasses to the drip pan, water and just a little bit of molasses. And you could use maple syrup, you could use apple juice. It's going to keep the grill very moist, and it's going to add a little bit of flavor. So that's just up to each individual. I happen to have some molasses handy, so I'm going to use that today. We'll be using a good amount of charcoal, so having the grill grate elevated will be helpful. The other thing is, if anybody wants a smoking guide, it lists all of the different, not all, but a lot of the wood options for smoking foods. Anywhere from alder down to pecan to oak to cherry wood, etc. And it talks about which wood is good for which type of meat. And there's some interesting comments, quotes in here, and some advice on cooking different meats. All right, we're getting ready to put our Tommy Z's bulletproof brisket on the grill. Today, I'm going to use a Flame Boss 300 to help me manage the pit temperature, the grill temperature. These things are great. They also have an app that syncs with your phone. You can actually change the temperature on your phone. It has a pit probe that monitors the pit temperature, and then it has a meat probe that we'll put into the meat to monitor the meat temperature once we start the cook. I'm going to try to cook the brisket between right around 228, 229 degrees today. The Flame Boss will actually keep the temperature dead on within 1 degree for several hours, or the entire cook. So I'm using my smoke and flavor maker. I've already got my chip basket with my hickory chips in the grill. And in the drip pan, I put water, and I'm going to use molasses. And I just poured some molasses in, I stirred it up, so we're ready to go. All I need to do is to simply slip my drip pan put my grill back on. Some people find it actually easier to have the drip pan already in and just to pour the water and molasses through the top of the grill. Either one works fine. It's probably a little safer to do it the other way. And we're going to put our brisket on with our fat side on top. I actually want the fat to sort of melt and flavor the meat from the top down. And you can see it's still heavily coated with garlic. I'll put the meat probe pretty much in the middle of the brisket. You don't want to push it all the way through to the other side. And I've got my temperature set at 229 degrees. And I want to cook this brisket till it reaches 198 degrees. Anywhere between 195 and 200. I've done the same cook probably 6 times. And one time I was a little late getting back here, and I didn't get it off till it was about 203 or 4 degrees. It didn't really matter. It still tasted great and came out perfectly. But 198 is sort of my go-to temperature for removing my brisket from the grill. So Let's come back in a few hours and see what we got. If you want to estimate your time, this brisket's pretty thin and it's only 4 pounds. So it's probably going to be an hour and 15, 20 minutes per pound, I'm going to guess. A lot of times it can be an hour and a half or more, particularly if you cook it at a little lower temperature, and if the brisket's really thick. All right, we'll be back shortly. All right, we removed our brisket from the grill, and Tommy Z's Bulletproof Brisket, I think it turned out pretty well. We got a nice bark. I took it off at about 198, 199 degrees, anywhere between 195, 96, and even as high as 202, 203 is great. And what you're going to want to do before you cut it, you're going to want to have it in a Pyrex or ceramic dish, and you're going to want to cover it in aluminum foil for an hour and a half, 2 hours. Let it sit and rest. Our cook time for a 4.5 pound brisket was probably close, a little longer than I thought, probably close to 7 hours. And we got the grill pretty steady around 227, 228 degrees. You could cook it a little warmer, a little hotter if you wanted. And we'll let this rest for a couple hours and then come back and cut it open. All right, we've let our meat rest for a while, ready to take it off and cut it open. We've got a really nice looking finish here. The color's really good. Everything looks great. I think it turned out exactly as we had hoped. And see if it tastes as good as it looks. It sure does. Tommy Z's Bulletproof Brisket. You're gonna love it.